So I wanted to brainstorm what an immersive Iron Man ride could look like, and I really think that this could be done by combining a few different things that's been done already in terms of amusement park rides, in addition to recreating the first flight sequence in the Iron Man 1 movie, because I think this would really be the best way to make you feel as if you're Iron Man. So what I think this would look like, if we're looking at something like the Haunted Mansion, I would really do that idea in terms of the Malibu Mansion or the Tony Stark Mansion being the exterior location of the ride, and you really enter by entering Tony Stark's mansion. You could have a replica of his home being where you kind of wait in line, and I really think it would be neat to have a descent down into his workshop, which is really where you board the ride. And I think a key thing here in terms of really creating this immersion would be having some animatronics, whether it's Tony working on some of the parts or having some of the different Iron Man suits set up in the background of his shop. I think that would all be really interesting in addition to the ride itself. But for the meat and potatoes, how I really think you could create the first test flight sequence would be to have a Tatsu style ride or a flying roller coaster ride. This is also known as a fourth dimension coaster. But really, instead of any seats like a typical roller coaster, you're having a harness and the ride being face down. And I think this would really mimic how Iron Man usually flies. And then I think after the boarding, you could have the ride take off just how Tony Stark does in the movie. It could really exit through the runway or the driveway that he had leading outside. And I think what would be really neat to take this ride to the next level, I think a combination of a few things. Looking at both Space Mountain and Peter Pan, I think this would really be where you could really create the flight effect. You could just have the ride going outside and being kind of similar to Tatsu. But I think if you're really just kind of flying over Disneyland in this fashion, it would break the immersion. So basically, I would envision this such as Space Mountain, but it's a face-down ride. And in addition to a lot of the stars effects you have in Space Mountain, you maybe have some sort of a setup on the bottom that really mimics the city perspective that you see in the Iron Man scene itself, or even similar to what you might see when an airplane is taking off at night. And I think this, along with maybe some sound effects with the Iron Man sounds or Jarvis or a lot of the popular Tony Stark lines from this movie scene, could really make this an interesting, immersive ride. You could also even do pretty similar flight paths to what he does in the movie. You could even do the icing problem or have a part of the ride that goes straight up for a little bit and then pauses and goes straight down and almost makes you feel like you're free falling, and then it really picking back up again when the Iron Man suit starts to boot back up again. So I really think this, in theory, could make for an incredible ride. The only thing I would say is there's obviously going to be a lot of financial costs to this and maybe some safety concerns if this is a little bit more of an extreme roller coaster. Maybe if you wanted to do something a little bit simpler, I would imagine something like Rise of the Resistance or Indiana Jones in terms of a third-person ride. This could maybe be done by recreating the final end sequence of the first Iron Man movie, and maybe this is just something you're riding through a cart in. But I think something ultimately in first person would really be the best experience in terms of feeling like you're Iron Man flying for the first time. But feel free to let me know your ideas on an amusement park Iron Man ride, and I'll see you later.